Maria Santos never imagined her steady hands, trained to perfect precision with scissors and razors, would one day save lives in ways she never dreamed possible. At 28, she had built a comfortable routine at the military base in Afghanistan, running the small salon that served both enlisted personnel and officers. Her days were filled with the familiar rhythm of cutting hair, trimming beards, and listening to the stories of homesick soldiers who found comfort in her chair. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, Maria had grown up in East Los Angeles where survival meant being resourceful and tough. Her grandmother taught her to cut hair in their tiny apartment kitchen, using old magazines as guides and practicing on willing neighbors. What started as a way to help her family save money became Maria's ticket to independence. After beauty school, she worked in various salons before discovering that military bases offered steady employment and good benefits. Maria's salon was more than just a place for grooming. It became an unofficial counseling center where soldiers opened up about their fears, their families back home, and their dreams for after deployment. She had a gift for making people feel heard and valued. Her warm smile and genuine interest in others made her popular among the troops, but she always maintained professional boundaries. To most people on base, she was simply the friendly hairdresser who never forgot a name or a story. The base itself was located in a volatile region where tensions ran high. Maria had grown accustomed to the distant sounds of helicopters, the occasional drill sirens, and the serious faces of soldiers heading out on missions. She understood the dangers that surrounded them, but her role felt safely removed from the combat operations. Her biggest concerns were ordering supplies, managing appointments, and dealing with the occasional difficult customer who wanted an impossible haircut. On this particular morning, Maria arrived early as usual, unlocking her salon and preparing for another busy day. The base was quieter than normal. With several units deployed on extended missions, she had heard whispers about increased enemy activity in the surrounding areas, but the officers assured everyone that security measures were adequate. Maria focused on her work, arranging her tools and reviewing her appointment book. As she swept the floor from the previous day's work, Maria noticed unusual activity outside her window. Military vehicles were moving with more urgency than usual, and she could see personnel hurrying between buildings with serious expressions. The base's communication system crackled occasionally with coded messages she couldn't understand. Something felt different, but Maria tried to push aside her growing unease. Her first appointment arrived right on time. Sergeant Johnson, a regular customer who always requested the same simple buzz cut, seemed more tense than usual. As Maria worked, he mentioned that several patrols had reported strange movements in the hills surrounding the base. Enemy scouts had been spotted, and intelligence suggested a possible coordinated attack was being planned. The conversation made Maria's hands shake slightly as she worked, but she maintained her professional composure. Throughout the morning, more soldiers came in with similar stories. The mood on base was shifting from routine alertness to genuine concern. Maria began to realize that her safe, predictable world was about to change dramatically. As she cleaned her equipment after each customer, she found herself paying closer attention to the sounds outside, the radio chatter, and the increasingly frequent announcements over the base's communication system. By midday, it became clear that the base was preparing for something significant. Maria's afternoon appointments were being canceled one by one, as soldiers were called to emergency briefings and defensive positions. She considered closing early and returning to her quarters, but something told her to stay. Her salon had become a place where people found comfort and normalcy, and she sensed that might be more important now than ever. The last rays of afternoon sun were filtering through her salon windows when Maria heard the first distant explosions. They were still far away, but close enough to rattle the windows slightly. The base's alarm system began its warning sequence, and she could hear shouting orders echoing across the compound. Maria's peaceful routine was about to collide with the harsh realities of war in ways she never could have imagined. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mitchell led his 8-man SEAL team through the rocky terrain with practiced silence. Their mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on enemy supply routes that had been disrupting coalition operations. The team had been deployed for 3 days, moving carefully through hostile territory, documenting positions and movements while avoiding detection. Mitchell was a seasoned operator with 12 years of special operations experience. His team respected him not just for his tactical expertise, but for his ability to bring everyone home safely. Today's mission felt different, though. Intelligence reports had been inconsistent, and the usual patterns they relied on seemed to be shifting. Enemy forces appeared more organized and coordinated than in previous encounters. The team consisted of carefully selected specialists. Rodriguez handled communications and spoke fluent Arabic. Thompson was their medic and explosives expert. Williams managed their heavy weapons and technical equipment. Each man had survived multiple deployments and understood that their survival depended on absolute trust in each other and flawless execution of their training. As they approached their final observation point, Rodriguez picked up concerning radio chatter on enemy frequencies. The conversations suggested a large-scale operation was underway, with multiple units moving toward predetermined positions. What had started as routine, reconnaissance, was beginning to look like they had stumbled into something much larger and more dangerous. Mitchell made the decision to gather as much intelligence as possible before withdrawing to base. They needed to understand the scope of what they were seeing. Through their scopes, they observed enemy fighters moving with unusual discipline and coordination. This wasn't the typical scattered resistance they usually encountered. Someone with serious military training was organizing these forces. The team documented positions, estimated numbers, and recorded radio frequencies for nearly 6 hours. As darkness approached, they prepared to begin their extraction back to base. The return journey would take them through difficult terrain, but they had planned multiple routes and contingencies. Everything seemed manageable until Rodriguez intercepted a radio transmission that changed everything. Enemy forces had somehow detected their presence and were moving to surround them. The transmission indicated that coalition forces at the base were also under surveillance, and that a coordinated attack was planned for that evening. Mitchell realized they were not just in immediate danger themselves, but that their home base was about to be attacked by a much larger force than anyone had anticipated. The team found themselves in an impossible situation. They could attempt to evade the enemy forces closing in on them, but that would mean abandoning any chance of warning the base about the impending attack. Alternatively, they could try to fight their way through the encirclement, but against overwhelming numbers, their chances of survival were minimal. Mitchell gathered his team for a quick tactical assessment. They had limited ammunition, no close air support available, and enemy forces approaching from multiple directions. The nearest coalition forces were at their home base, which was itself about to come under attack. Their communication equipment could reach the base, but the enemy was likely monitoring all frequencies. As the sun set behind the mountains, the SEAL team could see movement in the valleys around them. Dozens of enemy fighters were taking positions, clearly planning to trap them in a coordinated assault. The Americans had perhaps an hour before full darkness would give their enemies a significant advantage. Williams spotted muzzle flashes in the distance and realized that advanced enemy forces were already engaging the base's outer perimeter. The attack they had discovered was no longer a future threat, but a current reality. Mitchell knew that his team's specialized training and experience could make a crucial difference in the base's defense, but only if they could somehow break through the enemy forces surrounding them. The team prepared for what might be their final mission. They redistributed ammunition, checked their equipment one last time, and reviewed emergency signals. Each man understood that their chances of survival were slim, but they also knew that hundreds of their fellow service members at the base were depending on intelligence only they possessed. As enemy forces began to close their circle, Mitchell made a desperate decision that would test every aspect of their training and brotherhood. They would attempt something that violated every rule of small unit tactics, but might be their only chance to save both themselves and their comrades back at base. The first explosion shattered the evening quiet of the base, sending Maria diving behind her salon counter as windows rattled throughout the building. The attack had begun with mortars falling on the outer perimeter, followed immediately by small arms fire from multiple directions. The base's defense systems activated automatically, but it was clear that this assault was larger and more coordinated than anything they had faced before. Colonel Sarah Davidson, the base commander, rushed to the operations center as reports flooded in from all defensive positions. Enemy forces were attacking from 3 sides simultaneously, using the cover of darkness and superior numbers to press their advantage. The initial intelligence estimates had been catastrophically wrong. Instead of facing a small raiding party, the base was under assault by what appeared to be several hundred well-organized fighters. Maria remained crouched in her salon, listening to the chaos outside. Explosions were getting closer, and she could hear soldiers shouting orders as they moved to defensive positions. Through her window, she watched tracer rounds streaking across the compound as the base's defenders tried to establish fields of fire. The attack was unlike anything she had experienced during her 2 years at the base. In the operations center, communications were breaking down as enemy forces jammed radio frequencies and cut external communication lines. Colonel Davidson realized that standard reinforcement procedures were impossible to implement. The base was effectively isolated and would have to defend itself with whatever resources were immediately available. The nearest coalition forces were hours away, assuming they could even receive a distress call. The enemy's strategy became clear as the attack intensified. They were using classic military tactics to isolate and overwhelm the base's defenses. Mortar teams kept the defenders pinned down while assault teams moved closer under covering fire. The attackers had obviously studied the base's layout and defensive capabilities, suggesting extensive planning and intelligence gathering. Maria heard her salon door being tested and realized that soldiers were conducting room-to-room searches, securing civilians and non-essential personnel. When Staff Sergeant Martinez burst through her door, his face was grim with urgency. He quickly explained that all civilians were being moved to designated safe areas in the base's most secure buildings. Maria grabbed her emergency bag and followed him into the chaotic night. As they moved between buildings, Maria got her first clear view of the scope of the attack. Fires were burning in several locations around the perimeter, and the distinctive sound of enemy weapons could be heard from multiple directions. The base's defenders were fighting hard, but they were clearly outnumbered and struggling to maintain coordinated defensive positions. The designated safe area was the base's main communications bunker, built to withstand direct hits and equipped with independent power systems. When Maria arrived, she found about 30 other non-combat personnel, including medical staff, administrative workers, and civilian contractors. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, with military personnel maintaining professional calm despite the obviously desperate situation outside. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, the base's chief medical officer, was organizing triage procedures in case wounded personnel were brought to the bunker. She quickly identified Maria and other staff members who might be useful in treating casualties. Maria's steady hands and experience dealing with cuts and wounds made her a valuable assistant, even though her training was limited to basic first aid. Outside, the battle was intensifying as enemy forces probed for weaknesses in the base's defenses. The attackers were using sophisticated tactics, coordinating their assault to keep defenders from reinforcing threatened positions. Colonel Davidson realized that without immediate help, the base might not survive until dawn. The enemy clearly intended to overrun their positions before coalition reinforcements could arrive. Radio operator specialist Jennifer Walsh managed to establish brief communication with nearby units, but the messages were fragmentary and often cut short by jamming. She was able to confirm that enemy forces were much larger than initially estimated and that the attack was part of a broader offensive against coalition positions throughout the region. In the communications bunker, Maria listened to the radio traffic and began to understand the full scope of the crisis. This wasn't just an attack on their base, but a coordinated campaign designed to inflict maximum casualties and demonstrate that coalition forces could be defeated. The psychological impact of a successful assault would be devastating to military morale and political support for ongoing operations. As midnight approached, the sounds of battle seemed to be getting closer to the base's central compound. Maria realized that despite the thick walls of the bunker, they were not actually safe. If the base's defenses collapsed, enemy forces would systematically search every building, and the bunker would become a trap rather than a refuge. The turning point came when Specialist Walsh received a fragmentary transmission from an unknown source. The signal was weak and intermittent, but someone was trying to provide critical intelligence about enemy positions and movements. The voice was urgent and professional, suggesting it came from trained military personnel who were observing the battle from an external position. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's SEAL team had been moving through enemy territory for 8 hours, using every technique they knew to avoid the dozens of fighters hunting them. The enemy forces were well organized and persistent, using coordinated search patterns that suggested professional military training. The Americans were running low on ammunition and facing the grim reality that they might not survive to warn their base about the full scope of the attack. Rodriguez had been monitoring radio traffic throughout their evasion, learning valuable intelligence about enemy positions and intentions. The attack on their base was just one part of a larger operation designed to eliminate coalition presence in the entire region. Enemy commanders were coordinating multiple assault teams and had positioned reserve forces to exploit any breakthrough in the base's defenses. The team found temporary shelter in a rocky outcropping that provided cover from observation, but trapped them in a position with no good escape routes. Mitchell realized they had to make a desperate choice. They could continue trying to evade capture, which would likely result in their eventual death or capture without helping their comrades. Alternatively, they could attempt something unprecedented in special operations doctrine. Thompson proposed using their remaining explosives to create a diversion that might allow them to break through the enemy encirclement. The plan was dangerous and relied on precise timing, but it offered their only realistic chance of reaching the base before the defenses collapsed completely. Each team member understood that the plan would likely result in casualties, but the alternative was certain death for hundreds of their fellow service members. Williams identified an enemy ammunition depot that had been established to support the assault on the base. Destroying it would not only create confusion among the attackers, but would also eliminate a significant source of their firepower. The depot was heavily guarded, but its destruction might give the base's defenders a crucial advantage during the critical final hours of the battle. The team spent 2 hours planning their assault on the depot, studying guard patterns and identifying the best approach routes. They had only enough explosives for one attempt, and failure would alert every enemy fighter in the area to their exact location. Mitchell divided his remaining ammunition among the team, knowing that once they initiated their attack, they would have to fight their way out or die trying. Rodriguez managed to establish brief communication with the base, confirming that the defenders were under extreme pressure and might not last until dawn. The transmission was cut short by enemy jamming, but not before he was able to provide crucial intelligence about enemy reserve positions and planned assault routes. The information reached Colonel Davidson just as she was planning a desperate counterattack. As the SEAL team prepared for their assault, they could see the glow of fires from their base in the distance. The battle was clearly intense, with explosions visible even from their position several kilometers away. Each man understood that their sacrifice might be meaningless if the base had already fallen, but their training and brotherhood demanded that they make the attempt. The assault began at 200 hours with Thompson and Williams approaching the ammunition depot from 2 different directions. The guards were alert but focused on watching for threats from the direction of the base, not expecting an attack from behind their own lines. The SEALs used their remaining night vision equipment to navigate the complex approach routes they had identified. Mitchell and Rodriguez provided overwatch and communication support, ready to coordinate the team's extraction once the depot was destroyed. They had identified a withdrawal route that might allow them to reach friendly lines, but success depended on creating enough chaos and confusion to mask their movement. The timing had to be perfect or they would be caught in the open during daylight hours. The explosion that destroyed the ammunition depot lit up the night sky and could be heard for kilometers in every direction. Secondary explosions continued for several minutes as stored weapons and explosives detonated in a chain reaction that exceeded even Thompson's optimistic predictions. Enemy forces throughout the area were thrown into confusion as they tried to understand what had happened. The SEAL team used the chaos to begin their desperate run toward the base, knowing that every enemy fighter in the region would soon be hunting them. They had perhaps 30 minutes before organized pursuit would begin, and they still faced several kilometers of hostile territory. Their success in destroying the depot had given their comrades a fighting chance, but their own survival remained extremely uncertain. As they moved through the darkness, the team could hear radio chatter indicating that enemy commanders were struggling to reorganize their assault in the wake of losing their primary ammunition supply. The base's defenders were already taking advantage of the situation, launching limited counterattacks against positions that had been weakened by the explosion. Mitchell's desperate gamble was beginning to pay dividends, but the final outcome remained in doubt. Maria Santos found herself in an impossible situation when the communications bunker lost contact with the base's command center. Enemy forces had breached the outer perimeter and were fighting building by building through the compound. The 30 non-combat personnel trapped in the bunker faced a terrible choice: remain hidden and hope the defenders could hold, or risk everything to help the wounded soldiers who were being brought in faster than the medical staff could handle. Dr. Chen was overwhelmed with casualties, working frantically to stabilize wounded defenders who kept arriving, despite the dangerous conditions outside. Maria watched the controlled chaos and realized her skills might be more useful than anyone had imagined. Her steady hands, trained for precision work, and her experience dealing with cuts and injuries made her a natural assistant for emergency medical procedures. When Sergeant Torres was brought in with severe shrapnel wounds to his face and neck, Dr. Chen was treating a soldier with life-threatening chest injuries. Maria stepped forward without hesitation, using her experience with razors and precise cutting to help clean and assess Torres's wounds. Her calm demeanor and gentle touch helped stabilize him until the doctor could provide proper medical attention. The situation in the bunker deteriorated rapidly when Specialist Walsh received fragmentary radio reports indicating that enemy forces had overrun 2 of the base's key defensive positions. The defenders were falling back to a final defensive line, but casualties were mounting faster than reinforcements could be organized. Colonel Davidson's voice crackled over the radio, requesting any available personnel to assist with casualty evacuation and treatment. Maria made a decision that surprised everyone in the bunker, including herself. She volunteered to help evacuate wounded soldiers from the forward aid stations to the relative safety of the communications bunker. Her offer was initially rejected as too dangerous for a civilian, but Dr. Chen supported her, pointing out that they desperately needed additional medical support and that Maria had already demonstrated her value in treating casualties. Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had earlier escorted Maria to safety, reluctantly agreed to let her accompany a casualty evacuation team. He provided her with body armor and basic communication equipment, emphasizing that her job was strictly medical support and that she should take no unnecessary risks. Maria understood the dangers, but felt compelled to help the soldiers who had risked their lives to protect everyone on the base. The first evacuation mission took Maria and 3 soldiers across the compound under cover of darkness to retrieve wounded defenders from a forward position. The journey was terrifying, with enemy fire coming from multiple directions and explosions lighting up the night sky. Maria's hand shook as she helped load wounded soldiers onto stretchers, but her training in staying calm under pressure served her well. During the evacuation, Maria encountered something that changed her understanding of the entire situation. One of the wounded soldiers, Corporal Jackson, had been in radio contact with an unknown unit that was providing intelligence about enemy positions. The unit identified itself only by call sign and seemed to be operating behind enemy lines, but their information had been invaluable in helping the defenders anticipate and counter enemy movements. As Maria helped treat Jackson's wounds, he managed to explain that the unknown unit had destroyed an enemy ammunition depot, significantly reducing the firepower available to the attackers. However, the unit was now trying to reach friendly lines and was requesting emergency assistance. Jackson believed the unit was made up of special operations personnel who had been on a reconnaissance mission when the attack began. Maria realized that her knowledge of the base's layout and defensive positions might be crucial in helping the unknown unit reach safety. As a civilian employee, she had access to areas and information that might not be familiar to military personnel who were focused on combat operations. Her 2 years on the base had given her an intimate understanding of vehicle routes, supply corridors, and potential safe havens. When Maria proposed using her knowledge to help coordinate the extraction of the unknown unit, Staff Sergeant Martinez initially refused to consider such a dangerous mission. However, Dr. Chen supported her proposal, arguing that the intelligence value of the unit might be critical to the base's survival. The mysterious soldiers had already proved their worth by destroying the enemy ammunition depot. The decision to attempt a rescue mission was ultimately made by Colonel Davidson herself, who recognized that the base's situation was desperate enough to justify extraordinary risks. Maria would accompany a small team tasked with reaching the unknown unit and guiding them to safety. Her civilian status and detailed knowledge of the base's infrastructure made her an unlikely but potentially valuable member of the rescue team. As dawn approached, Maria prepared for a mission that would take her far outside the relative safety of the communications bunker. She had transformed from a simple hairdresser into a crucial participant in a battle for survival. Her steady hands, normally used for cutting hair and providing comfort, would now be employed in an effort to save the lives of soldiers she had never met but who had already saved countless others, and the rescue mission would require Maria to demonstrate courage and resourcefulness that she never knew she possessed. Her comfortable routine of salon work was a distant memory as she prepared to venture into active combat zones to help extract the SEAL team that had been fighting for survival behind enemy lines. Maria Santos crouched beside Staff Sergeant Martinez in the pre-dawn darkness, studying a hand-drawn map of the terrain between their position and the last known location of the trapped SEAL team. The rescue mission consisted of only 5 people: Martinez, 2 combat medics, a communications specialist, and Maria herself. Colonel Davidson had authorized the mission, despite its enormous risks, because the intelligence provided by the unknown unit had already saved dozens of lives. The route to reach the SEAL team required crossing nearly 2 kilometers of hostile territory where enemy forces were still active despite their recent setbacks. Maria's detailed knowledge of the base's external infrastructure proved invaluable in planning their approach. She remembered maintenance roads, drainage systems, and supply routes that weren't marked on standard military maps but could provide concealed movement corridors. Rodriguez had managed to establish brief radio contact with the base, providing GPS coordinates for his team's current position and requesting immediate extraction. The SEAL team was trapped in a rocky outcropping with limited ammunition and at least 1 wounded member. Enemy search teams were systematically checking every possible hiding place, and the Americans estimated they had perhaps an hour before being discovered. Maria suggested using an old maintenance tunnel that connected the base's water treatment facility to an external pumping station. The tunnel was narrow and partially flooded, but it would allow the rescue team to move undetected to within 500 meters of the SEAL team's position. Her suggestion was initially dismissed as too dangerous, but Martinez realized it might be their only chance of reaching the trapped soldiers without fighting through multiple enemy positions. The journey through the maintenance tunnel tested everyone's courage and endurance. The tunnel was dark, cramped, and filled with knee-deep water that made movement slow and treacherous. Maria led the way, using her flashlight to navigate obstacles and guide the team through sections where the tunnel branched in different directions. Her knowledge of the base's infrastructure systems proved more valuable than anyone had anticipated. When the rescue team emerged from the tunnel, they found themselves in a landscape transformed by battle. Enemy forces had established temporary positions throughout the area, and the sounds of ongoing combat echoed from multiple directions. Maria helped identify covered approach routes using her familiarity with the terrain, pointing out features that weren't obvious to the soldiers, but which she remembered from supply runs and maintenance activities. The final approach to the SEAL team's position required crossing open ground while enemy patrols searched the area. Martinez made the difficult decision to split his team, sending the medics and communications specialist on a diversionary route, while he and Maria attempted to reach the trapped Americans directly. Maria's smaller size and civilian clothes might allow her to move more quietly than a fully equipped soldier. As they crawled across the rocky terrain, Maria could hear voices speaking in a foreign language not far from their position. Enemy fighters were conducting a methodical search, checking every possible hiding place and gradually closing in on the SEAL team's location. The rescue had to succeed within the next few minutes, or the trapped Americans would be discovered and likely killed or captured. Maria's first sight of the SEAL team shocked her with their professional competence despite desperate circumstances. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and his men had used their limited resources to create defensive positions and prepare for a final stand. When Martinez identified himself, the relief on their faces was obvious, but they remained focused on the tactical situation and the challenges of extraction. Thompson, the team's medic, had been wounded during their earlier assault on the ammunition depot. Maria immediately moved to assist him, using her first aid training and steady hands to help stabilize his injuries for transport. Her calm presence and gentle touch provided comfort to the wounded soldier, who had been fighting through pain and exhaustion for hours. The extraction route back to the base required the combined team to move quickly through territory that was becoming increasingly dangerous as enemy forces realized their ammunition depot had been destroyed by external forces. Rodriguez used his radio to coordinate with the base's defenders, requesting covering fire and diversionary actions to mask their movement. Maria found herself helping to carry Thompson during the most difficult sections of the withdrawal, her physical fitness and determination allowing her to keep pace with the trained soldiers, despite the challenging conditions. Her transformation from salon worker to combat medic was complete, driven by necessity and her natural instinct to help others in crisis situations. The journey back through the maintenance tunnel was even more treacherous with the additional personnel, but Maria's knowledge of the route allowed them to navigate safely despite the darkness and confusion. Enemy forces were searching for them above ground, but the tunnel system provided crucial concealment during the most vulnerable part of their extraction. As they approached the base's perimeter, Maria could see that the battle's intensity had decreased significantly since the destruction of the ammunition depot. The base's defenders had used the tactical advantage to reorganize their positions and establish better fields of fire. The SEAL team's sacrifice had not only saved their own lives but had contributed to the survival of the entire base. When they finally reached the communications bunker, Maria realized that her comfortable life as a base hairdresser was forever changed. She had discovered capabilities and courage she never knew she possessed, and her actions had directly contributed to saving the lives of some of America's most elite warriors. Dawn broke over the military base with an eerie quiet that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the previous night. Maria Santos sat in the communications bunker, still wearing the body armor that had protected her during the rescue mission, watching as medics continued treating wounded soldiers. The attack had been repelled, but the cost in human terms was evident in every stretcher that passed through the bunker's doors. Colonel Davidson arrived at the bunker as the sun climbed higher, her face showing the strain of commanding a successful defense against overwhelming odds. She had come specifically to speak with Maria, whose actions during the night had been reported by multiple witnesses. The colonel's expression was serious, but respectful as she approached the exhausted hairdresser who had become an unlikely hero. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell and his surviving SEAL team members were receiving medical attention in the bunker's triage area. Thompson's wounds were serious but not life-threatening, thanks in part to Maria's quick assistance during their extraction. Mitchell had already submitted a detailed report, crediting Maria's knowledge and courage as essential factors in their successful rescue and the intelligence that helped save the base. The full scope of Maria's contributions became clear as various personnel reported their experiences from the night. Dr. Chen described her invaluable assistance in treating casualties, noting her steady hands and calm demeanor under extreme pressure. Staff Sergeant Martinez detailed her crucial role in planning and executing the rescue mission, emphasizing how her civilian knowledge had made the impossible extraction successful. Rodriguez, the SEAL team's communications specialist, had documented how Maria's suggestion to use the maintenance tunnel system had saved precious time and possibly prevented casualties during their withdrawal. Her intimate knowledge of the base's infrastructure had provided tactical advantages that trained military personnel couldn't have anticipated or utilized effectively. Media attention began focusing on the base's successful defense. Within hours of the attack's conclusion, initial reports highlighted the professional competence of the military defenders and the tactical significance of destroying the enemy ammunition depot. However, as more details emerged, Maria's role in the events captured public imagination in ways that surprised everyone involved. The story of a civilian hairdresser who helped rescue elite SEAL team members resonated with people far beyond military circles. Maria's transformation from salon worker to combat medic and rescue coordinator demonstrated that heroism could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her actions challenged traditional assumptions about who could contribute meaningfully to military operations. Military investigators spent several days documenting the events of the attack and the various factors that contributed to the base's successful defense. Maria's role was officially recognized in after-action reports that would influence future planning for civilian personnel in combat zones. Her knowledge and quick thinking had provided capabilities that weren't available through traditional military channels. The Pentagon announced several commendations for personnel involved in the base's defense, including a Civilian Service Award for Maria that recognized her exceptional courage and contribution to military operations. The award ceremony was conducted at the base with representatives from both military and civilian leadership attending to honor her achievements. Maria's story was featured in military publications and mainstream media outlets, highlighting how civilian support personnel could make crucial differences in combat situations. Her experience prompted discussions about better integration of civilian knowledge and capabilities into military planning and operations. Defense officials began reviewing policies for utilizing civilian expertise in crisis situations. Letters and messages of support arrived from around the world as Maria's story spread through social media and news coverage. Veterans organizations, women's groups, and civilian support networks praised her courage and dedication. Many people found inspiration in her transformation from routine service provider to life-saving hero. Despite the recognition and media attention, Maria remained focused on her original mission of providing comfort and support to military personnel. She returned to operating her salon on the base, but with a new understanding of her role in the military community. Her experience had shown her that civilian contributions to military operations could extend far beyond traditional support functions. The SEAL team maintained contact with Maria after their recovery, developing friendships that transcended the dramatic circumstances of their first meeting. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell recommended her for advanced first aid training, recognizing that her natural abilities and proven courage made her a valuable asset for future emergency situations. Maria's salon became an informal gathering, place where soldiers shared stories about the attack and the lessons learned from their experience. Her presence provided continuity and normalcy for personnel who were processing the trauma of combat. She had evolved from simply cutting hair to providing a different kind of healing for those who served. 6 months after the attack, Maria received notification that she had been accepted for advanced medical training that would formalize her emergency response capabilities. Her transformation from hairdresser to recognized first responder was complete, but she never forgot that heroism had emerged from simply doing what seemed right in an impossible situation. Her story continued to inspire others to recognize their own potential for extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded it.